Thank you guys for coming. I appreciate y'all doing this. I have to admit, I'm a little bit nervous because I'm a little bit of a smart aleck. I'll say that, okay? So I'm gonna ask Dale to ask you the questions. I'm gonna say, Dale, ask your dad this. No, I'm not really. No, I'm not really. But we're gonna talk about racing, life. We're gonna talk about a lot of things. But I wanna start with you. Red, at an early age, you were already driving a car. Did your dad go to races? Did your dad take you to races? I mean, what was your fascination with the automobile?
When I was about 14 or 13, 14, 15 along there, he did take me to some races, dirt track races at North Wilkesboro, Charlotte, and so he made a race fan out of me, but never thinking that I might one day drive race cars. And then when they started building the Hickory Speedway, it was a big thing in the community. You go down to the country store and all those farmers and sawmillers were sitting around. That's what I grew up in, the atmosphere that I grew up in. And they'd say, boy, wait till they get that thing built. So I'll go up there and show them how to drive. And so I worked it out. So the first race that was ever run at the Hickory Speedway in 1951, I was there. One half interest in a race car and a poker game. And so didn't talk to my dad about it. My dad was a well-respected man in the community. He couldn't see where his son participating with that group of people, which most of them were bootleggers back in those days. He didn't think that was the kind of image that I needed to be involved with. Till my partner had been a former motorcycle racer, so he said, I'll drive the car. So he did. One night he got sick and didn't feel like driving. It was on a Saturday night and pretty dark in the infield. He said, well, let's go out in the infield and we'll change shirts. He had on a checkered shirt and I had on a striped shirt. And it was hard to tell the difference in us, really. And so anyway, I drove the car that night and finished second. And used his name. And he hadn't done that well, so we just got by with it that night, so we just kept doing it for a little while till we lucked up and won a race. And then the word got out in the community. My dad heard about it and he said, okay, he said, if you're so determined to drive one of those things, said, use your own name and get credit for any accomplishments that you might have along the way.
So let me get this straight. You won part interest in a race car.
Yeah.
And a poker game.
Yeah.
Your partner was a motorcycle guy and you were hanging out with bootleggers. That's my whole family. That's my whole family, Ned. You just got my whole family.
It was a way of life back then. Good people.
Oh, so you talk about learning or hearing about Hickory Motor Speedway and everybody in the community. It was a big deal. I'm fascinated by that because I know how Dale and I got into this. You were his hero and Richard Petty was my hero. We just followed.
You know, our kids, like you said, played around. Now they're out here racing with each other. So I know I'm real proud of the whole thing.
But I'm fascinated that you grew up on a farm and sawmilling and then said, this is for me. Was it after you ran that first race and you said, yeah, I can put it on the burner? Could you really have put it on the back burner?
I think I would have had a hard time putting it on the burner for a long time, but still, I respected my dad so much that I wanted to go along with his wishes.
You know, that is, and the stuff that I've read recently and getting ready for this, the two words that keep coming up in almost any conversation when people talk about Ned Jarrett is devotion to their family.
Well, I have 3 children. My oldest son, Glenn, is 15. I have a son, Dale, who is 9, and a little girl, Patty, who is 6. And of course, they're all avid Ned Jarrett racing fans.
So I watched the thing the other day, shot with you guys at home. And you're at the dinner table, and you ask Dale to give grace.
God is great, God is good. Let us thank Him for our food. By His hands we'll all be fed. Give us, Lord, our daily bread. Amen.
The values that your father taught you, how important was that to you? Because you were gone. I mean, I know what it was like to grow up with a dad that was a race car driver, and a lot of that was left to Martha. But for you, when he was home, how important was that a part of your family?
Well, I think we understood, you know, the life and what it was about. And as you well know, you know, in those days, they were running 70-some races a year. So, you know, it was 3 and 4 races a week at times. You know, they'd get gone on the northern swing. You know, California, it wasn't jumping on your airplane and flying out there and running a race and flying back. They drove across the country and back, and so they were gone for long periods of time. So yeah, we looked to my mom. She ran the household, but yet when Dad was there, it was a huge amount of respect because of what he did, how hard he worked. He talks about how his dad, my grandfather, we called him Pop, and I mean, he worked all the time. He worked hard, but he was a good man, and so you could see that in my dad. And so when he was there, it was time that we cherished whenever he was at home. But we also were fortunate that a lot of the races were close by, so we'd load up in the station wagon as a family and go, and that's what we did. We lived out of that station wagon. If we were at the racetrack, it was in the infield, and that's where we had our lunch, and ever how long we were there, that's where we did our meals. So I think Ford did that movie, if you will, about my dad and what it was like in the little town of Camden at that time. And I mean, he was a hero there. He was a star.
Ned Jarrett is in a somewhat unusual business. At least some people think so. Ned Jarrett's business is stock car racing. The two words that best describe Ned Jarrett are dedication and devotion. He is devoted to his family, dedicated to the sport of stock car racing, and to the business of racing.
I'll never ever forget, as long as I live, one of the things that happened was in 1965, Dad went on to win the championship, but it's when he won the Southern 500.
There's Ned Jarrett taking the checkered flag in the 16th Southern 500.
Of course, we're only 30 miles from Camden, being at Darlington, but he won by 14 laps, which is a record that'll never be broken.
Never.
And
Flat had him covered that day.
Never, yeah, you had him covered.
But we finished everything at the racetrack, and we drive back, and I'm telling you, it looked like the entire town of Camden, South Carolina, was at our house. I mean, it was hard to weave through. Everybody was there because it pretty much clinched the championship for him, and to win that race was just incredible. But it made me realize then just what a special person he was.
I want to stay on this a little bit. And in that same piece, you talk about Glenn maybe not wanting to be a race car driver, but you said, here's a 9-year-old Dale Jarrett. And in that piece you say, I think Dale's destined to be a race car driver.
My oldest son, Glenn, he really does not have a desire to become a race driver. But Dale, he seems destined to become a race driver.
What made you think that about that 9-year-old little boy in your house?
Well, first of all, he had a lot of God-given talent as an athlete. Whatever sport that he chose, he was going to be good at. I had no doubt of what he would be good at, and he had the determination and the work ethic to be good, and that's what you have to have in any sport. It doesn't matter, period.
Dale Jarrett's going to win the Daytona 500! All right!
And I will have to say, I got to interject this. You said you had him covered that day. I will never forget, I won at Rockingham and almost slapped everybody, and you came down the next week and you came up and you said congratulations, and you said enjoy that, they only come along once in a lifetime. You know what I mean? And you're exactly right. I mean, those are rare moments, but that record for you, 14 laps, but it's the distance. Nobody's ever won a race by that many miles.
I really need to clarify that a little bit. I didn't have them covered that well. I ran good. I ran in the top 5 all day, and then they started dropping out like flies. I just happened to nurse it to the end.
But I'm going to correct you. You did have them covered, because that was part of the game then.
Well,
part of the game was making it to the end. I don't think in this day and time that people realize how hard it was to get a car to run an entire Southern 500. A lot of that fell in the driver's hands, and Ned Jarrett was the best that day of making that thing come home. I want to go back to Hickory. I want to go back a little bit before that, and you were young. You would have been, what, 2-3 years old at that point in time, so you probably don't remember hanging out at the shop and stuff. You ended up in '59 with a car that was Junior Johnson's. You ended up with a car, but you had no money to pay for it.
Well, I was bumming a ride from a guy from Kannapolis, North Carolina, by the name of R.C. McDaniels. He had a '57 Chevrolet, and '57 Chevrolets were good race cars back in those days. But he didn't have the money to get the parts that he needed. He'd go to the junkyard or what somebody would give him and put on the car, and invariably that thing would break down.
Ned Jarrett, trying to avoid trouble, bounces off the guardrail.
So we raced at Greenville, South Carolina on a Friday night. One of my brothers and a guy by the name of John Tate were with me. I said, guys, I got to change my career. They said, what are you going to do? I said, well, that car that Junior Johnson's been driving, winning races with it, is for sale. They want $2,000 for it. They said, well, what are you going to pay for it with? I said, well, I'll wait till the bank closes on Saturday. That's when it stayed open on Saturday till noon. I said, I'll give them a check for it. And there was a race at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on Saturday night, paid $950 to win. And there was a race at the old Charlotte Fairgrounds, which was a half-mile dirt track in Charlotte on Sunday afternoon. It also paid $950 to win.
Okay, here's where we have to put the disclaimer in for young people out there. Don't do this day and time. It doesn't work now. This is a long time ago. Okay.
Different circumstances.
Good point. Good point.
And, but anyway, they said, you don't believe that you can, surely you don't think that you can do that. I said, oh yeah, I can do it. Car's been winning races, and if he can win them, I can win them. And so went down there to Myrtle Beach and got there late, didn't get any practice. And I know your granddad was one of those that I had to beat. Fireball Roberts and Buck Baker, I mean, those guys that had been winning races in the series. And anyway, boiled down to Jim Pascal and I at the last lap. So I passed him going into turn 3, knowing that he was going to pass me back going into turn 1 on the white flag lap. But I looked up in my rearview mirror and he was headed to the pits. He broke a wheel down. And so I was home free. We was good ways ahead of the second place car, so we won that race. Worked all night on the car. And back then, you might have seen some of the cars, the way that, you know, the steering wheel was no bigger than your thumb to grip, and it just crimped your fingers. And I didn't know until the green flag dropped that whoever wrapped it put the electrician's tape backwards, and the edges were sticking out, and there I was for 200 laps on a rough dirt track, sawing that wheel and just cutting my hand. I didn't know how bad it was until checkered flag fell, and they had to put a tourniquet on this right arm to be able to do a little victory lane ceremony because it was bleeding so bad.
Wow.
And so we got through with that, and there was a little hospital on the way out of Myrtle Beach. And I said, well, I got to drive a race tomorrow. And they said, there's no way. There's no way you're going to drive a race car with those hands and arms bandaged up there. I said, I got to. And so anyway, got to Charlotte, worked the rest of the night on the car, and got her ready to go, and was running in the top 5 the next day, and everything was going along good, except that I was tired. Worked all that and lost all that blood. And anyway, Joe Weatherly was in the pits. And so the crew went over and got him to get in the car. And Joe was so short, he had a hard time reaching the pedals, but he kept it in contention. And Junior was driving a Wood Brothers car that day, and he blew the engine in it. I went over and talked to him. I said, Junior, would you get in that car? Joe just can't reach the pedals. And he said, yeah, I'll drive it. So anyway, another caution came and brought him in, and Junior got in the car and went on and won the race.
No way.
And so I got the credit for it. Because I had started the race, and we won the race, and the word got around in the pits about the bad check that I'd given for it. And so they wouldn't take any money for driving the car because they knew I needed that whole $1,900.
No way.
And having to scrape up the other 100 before the bank opened on Monday morning.
Hey NASCAR fans, thanks for checking out the NBC Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you hit subscribe below for the latest NASCAR news, race highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.